It's a Tuesday afternoon. You're in a quarterly review you've run 20 times. Someone questions your numbers. Same energy, same skeptical tone you've heard your whole career. And something is different. Your chest tightens, your voice comes out slightly wrong, you get through it, and then you excuse yourself, and in the bathroom, hands in the sink, staring at yourself in the mirror, you think, what is happening to me? Here is what's happening, and it has nothing to do with that meeting. My name is Cassandra Quick. I'm an EMDR-certified executive coach and founder of the Embodied Rise Institute. I work specifically with high-performing women in leadership, executives, founders, CEOs, directors, who are navigating the intersection of corporate pressure and perimenopause. And I'm not talking about hot flashes and sleep disruption, though those are obviously very real. What I'm talking about is what happens to your nervous system, your leadership capacity, your emotional regulation, your ability to stay composed in rooms you've been in 100 times when perimenopause collides with patterns you've been carrying since childhood. That intersection is my clinical specialty, and it is what I'm going to break down for you today. Here is what most nervous system content gets wrong. It treats your reactions as a single layer problem. You got triggered, your amygdala fired, you need to regulate. End of story. But for high-performing women in midlife leadership, that model is incomplete because you are not running one crisis, you are running two simultaneously. Crisis one is the survival pattern you developed early in life. Maybe you grew up in a home where criticism felt dangerous, so you became hyper-competent to avoid it. Maybe authority figures were unpredictable, so you learned to read the room before anyone else could. Maybe love felt conditional on performance, so you wired your nervous system to never show weakness. These aren't personality quirks. These are threat responses, very sophisticated, effective ones, that got you here, to this level, to this room, and they worked until they became a problem. Crisis two is perimenopause. And I want to be very precise about this because this is not a wellness talking point. This is actually neuroscience. So estrogen has receptors in your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that governs executive function. Emotional regulation and the capacity to override your amygdala. When estrogen fluctuates and declines in perimenopause, those receptors become less stable. Studies out of the Menopause Society show actual structural changes in the frontal cortex and hippocampus, the regions governing working memory and decision making. The buffer that your nervous system had been quietly relying on, keeping crisis one contained, perimenopause is reducing it. In real time, in your leadership life, two crises running at once, and you've been trying to solve it with breathing exercises and boundary setting. I want you to think about something. For the last 15 or 20 years, you probably had a system, an internal one. You could feel when a meeting was going sideways and recalibrate before anyone noticed. You could absorb someone's tone, a dismissive comment, a challenge to your expertise, a room that wasn't listening, and you responded instead of reacting. You had a window, a split-second gap between stimulus and response. And that gap is what regulation actually looks like. And it wasn't just discipline. It wasn't just skill. It was also in part your neurochemistry. Estrogen supports serotonin synthesis. It supports GABA, a neurotransmitter responsible for calming hyperarousal. It supports dopamine pathways involved in motivation and reward. When your hormonal environment was more stable, your nervous system had a biochemical cushion that was helping you maintain that window of tolerance. As perimenopause progresses, that cushion is thinner, which means the same trigger that would have produced a contained professional response 2 years ago is now blowing through your regulation system before your prefrontal cortex even comes online. This is why the tools that used to work feel useless now. You are not failing the tools. The tools were calibrated for a nervous system you no longer have. The women I work with describe it the same way almost universally. I used to be able to handle this. I don't understand what changed. And here's what changed, and it was never a character flaw. Now, I want to go one layer deeper because the perimenopause piece explains why the buffer is thinner, but it doesn't explain what's underneath the buffer. So crisis one does. Here's how I frame this with my clients. The survival strategies that got you to the C-suite were created by a much younger version of you, an 8-year-old who needed to be competent, composed, or invisible to feel safe in her environment, a kid who figured out very quickly what was required of her and built a nervous system around delivering that. That pattern doesn't go away when you get promoted. It gets promoted with you. So when someone in a meeting questions your numbers in a tone that sounds like the person who once made you feel like you weren't enough, your nervous system isn't responding to the VP across the table. It is responding to a 35-year-old threat. And it is pulling out the response it learned works. Over-explain, shut down, get loud, go cold, leave the room. Whatever your specific pattern is. The technical term for this in EMDR work is an unprocessed neural network, a threat memory that never completed its cycle. So it stays activated and ready to fire when a similar stimulus appears. In a regulated, hormonally stable nervous system, your prefrontal cortex can catch the fire before it reaches your mouth. In a perimenopause-affected, chronically stressed nervous system with 2 crises running simultaneously, that 8-year-old gets the microphone before you even know she's in the room. So what do you actually do with this? The first thing, and I mean the very first thing before any tool, any technique, any regulation practice, is mapping. Not journaling, not reflection, mapping. You need to know specifically what your triggers are. Not, quote unquote, I get triggered by dismissal. That's too vague to work with. I mean the actual specific sensory and relational patterns that activate your threat response, the tone of your voice, the type of room, the dynamic, the time of day in your hormonal cycle, the specific words that flip that switch. When you have that map, a real one, built with clinical precision, you can start to identify which nervous system crisis is being activated in each situation. Is this a perimenopause hyperarousal response? A childhood survival pattern? Both? That distinction completely changes how you intervene. And without a map, you are guessing. And guessing in real time under pressure with a dysregulated nervous system while also trying to lead a team, that is not strategy. That's just suffering with extra steps. The map is the intervention. Everything else builds on top of it. So here's what I want you to walk away with today. The reactions you have been ashamed of, the voice that came out wrong, the emotion that showed up uninvited, the response that felt disproportionate. They are not evidence that you are too sensitive, too reactive, or not cut out for this level of leadership. They are evidence that your nervous system is doing exactly what it was designed to do, protect you from threats, old ones and new ones, simultaneously. You are not falling apart. You are running 2 operating systems at once on hardware that is going through its most significant neurological change since adolescence. This is a nervous system problem, not a character problem, not a weakness problem, a nervous system problem. And nervous system problems have nervous system solutions. We can